It looked like a tragic break-in. A broken window, a body on the floor. But behind that blood-stained carpet was a deed worth $500,000, and someone willing to kill for it. This wasn't a robbery. It was a calculated betrayal masked as chaos. And the killer wasn't a stranger. It started with a 911 call that sounded routine. "I think there's been a break-in. Someone's not breathing." But when officers arrived, nothing added up. The door wasn't forced. The valuables weren't touched. And the only thing missing? A signed deed tucked away in a drawer, until someone made sure it vanished along with the homeowner's last breath. For decades, the white Colonial on Cherry Hollow Road had been a local landmark in scenic Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Built in the 1920s and lovingly maintained, it was the kind of property that families dreamed of passing down through generations. And that was exactly what Eloise Stanton had intended. At 72, Eloise was a widow with no children of her own. But she wasn't alone. Her late husband's nephew, David Stanton, had been like a son to her, charming, attentive, and always available to help with odd jobs around the house. She told everyone who'd listen that she intended to leave him everything: the house, the land, even the antique furniture inside. To Eloise, David was family. But to David, Eloise was an obstacle. By the spring of 2022, Eloise had grown frail. Her heart was weakening, and a mild stroke had slowed her speech. David visited often, bringing groceries, checking her blood pressure, taking walks with her around the garden. He was the picture of devotion. But neighbors would later recall odd moments. David parked in the driveway late at night, even when Eloise was asleep. Strange arguments overheard through open windows. And once, a scream. Then, on June 4th, Eloise was found dead at the bottom of the stairs. It looked like an accident. The house was old, the railing loose. David was the one who called 911, his voice shaking as he told dispatchers he'd come to check on her and found her unresponsive. Paramedics noted bruising, but it didn't raise suspicion. At 72, with her health declining, a fall wasn't unexpected. David grieved publicly, quietly accepted condolences, and then just 3 weeks later moved into the house. But things didn't sit right with Eloise's longtime friend and caregiver, Lorraine Pierce. Lorraine had known Eloise for over 20 years and visited her every Thursday. The week before Eloise died, she'd confessed something unsettling. David had been pressing her to sign the new will, a revised version that left everything to him, cutting out the charities and friends previously listed. She said, "I feel like he's waiting for me to die," Lorraine told detectives. And then, she did. At first, Lorraine's concerns were brushed off. The will was in place, notarized and dated just 3 weeks before Eloise's death. Everything appeared legal. But a single overlooked detail cracked the case open. The date of the will? Eloise had been hospitalized that day. Hospital records confirmed she was heavily sedated and partially incoherent during a brief ER visit on May 12th. That same afternoon, according to the documents David submitted to probate court, she'd allegedly signed the new will in perfect handwriting. Forensic handwriting analysts were brought in. What they found was disturbing. The signature wasn't Eloise's, it was a near-perfect forgery. When confronted, David claimed Eloise had rallied that afternoon and was lucid enough to make legal decisions. But the hospital staff said otherwise. And a deeper dive into David's finances revealed a motive darker than greed. He was nearly $130,000 in debt. Gambling losses, payday loans, maxed out credit cards. The house was his only way out. A search warrant executed on the home revealed a folder in David's filing cabinet labeled Plan B. Inside were printouts, how to stage an accidental death, signs of elder abuse and how to avoid them, undetectable poisons for seniors. But the most damning piece? A deleted text message recovered from his old phone. "She won't sign. Might not need her to. She trusted him like a son. He treated her like a stepping stone. All for a house he couldn't afford and a future built on fraud." But the story doesn't end here. If you've watched this far, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because what happens next will prove just how far someone will go to protect a lie, even if it means killing again. On the surface it looked like grief, tears, trembling hands. But behind the funeral speeches and black dresses was something colder, calculated. Because someone had just inherited a home that wasn't meant to be theirs. And the paperwork told a story that the blood tried to cover up. The day after Alan Prescott's funeral, the town of Manchester, Connecticut, returned to its usual rhythm. But inside the probate office, gears were turning. Detective Melissa Grant wasn't convinced by the initial theory that Alan's death was a robbery gone wrong. The neighborhood was too quiet. The entry too clean. Nothing stolen, except a man's life. And now, something else had vanished, the original deed to Alan's house. It should have been in his desk drawer. That's where the real estate agent said Alan always kept it, neatly folded, beneath a lock Alan only trusted himself to open. But when the detective examined the drawer, it was empty. No lock had been broken. No signs of struggle near it. Meanwhile, Alan's will was being reviewed. His niece, Caroline Prescott, a soft-spoken woman in her late 30s, had been Alan's closest living relative. She had tears in her eyes during the reading. But Melissa noticed something else too. Caroline didn't seem surprised when the lawyer announced that Alan had left everything to her, including the house. Alan told me he had updated his will last spring, Caroline explained. He said he wanted to keep it simple. But Melissa found that hard to believe. Alan had long-standing ties with several charities. In fact, he'd spent the last 5 years donating to veteran housing initiatives and even promised part of his estate to local causes. It didn't fit his character to leave everything to one person. So the detective did what she did best: follow the paper trail. At the records office, things got murky. 2 versions of the deed existed. The first, dated 2 years prior, listed Alan as the sole owner. The second, filed only a month before his death, added Caroline's name. Co-owner. Equal beneficiary. The signatures matched and everything appeared in order. But Melissa had a gut feeling. It wasn't enough to raise an accusation, but it was enough to keep digging. She paid a visit to Alan's attorney, Jeffrey Mallory, who was stunned. "I didn't file a new deed. Alan never mentioned adding anyone to the title. In fact, he told me he didn't trust anyone with that kind of access to his estate." Jeffrey agreed to hand over a copy of Alan's original will. That document named multiple beneficiaries: his church, a local animal rescue, and yes, Caroline, but only as a partial heir, not the sole owner of the house. If a new will had replaced the old one, who filed it, and why? The signature on the amended document looked eerily similar. But it didn't take long for a handwriting expert to flag inconsistencies. It wasn't just that the stroke pressure varied or that certain letters curved unnaturally. It was the timing. Alan had undergone shoulder surgery 6 weeks before the new will was allegedly signed. At that time, he was still in physical therapy and had told his doctor he couldn't even hold a pen steady. Melissa was now staring down the barrel of something far darker than a break-in. An inside job rooted in inheritance fraud, forged documents, and premeditated murder. But proving it wouldn't be easy. Caroline was careful. She had no criminal record. She worked part-time as a caregiver, had a calm, maternal demeanor, and had always visited Alan regularly. To outsiders, she looked like the devoted niece, a woman shattered by her uncle's death. But Melissa kept watching. 3 days later, Caroline made a quiet visit to a notary service across town. The officer on duty remembered her. "She seemed nervous," the woman recalled. "She asked me to notarize a document transferring deed ownership fully into her name. Said her uncle had died and she wanted to finalize things quickly." Too quickly. Melissa subpoenaed the service log and verified the date, just 2 days after Alan's death. That's not how probate works. Ownership transfers are suspended until the estate is reviewed and authenticated. Why was Caroline rushing it? Because Melissa now believed she was trying to close the window before anyone found out the deed was fake. When detectives examined Caroline's home, tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac, they discovered a laptop. A forensic team pulled metadata from documents found on her desktop. One-word file, titled Prescott_transfer_final, was created on a date that predated Alan's death, but the metadata revealed it had been modified the day before he was killed. Melissa didn't need a confession now. She had the motive, money. She had the means, access to Alan's house and records. And now, she had the beginning of a timeline. Caroline forged the deed and the will, and Alan likely found out. The only thing missing was how far she'd go to silence him. And the answer might lie in the security footage they were still decrypting, from a neighbor's backyard camera that pointed straight at Alan's driveway. The footage, time-stamped at 9:48 p.m., just minutes before the time of death, showed a vehicle pulling up quietly to Alan's curb. The make and model? A silver Honda CR-V, Caroline's exact car. If you've watched this far, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because next, we'll uncover what happened inside that house the night Alan died. A camera caught the car, but did it catch the killer? The safe had never been touched. The jewelry was still there. But the most valuable thing in that entire house, the property deed, was gone. And the only person who knew where it was hidden was dead. Was this just coincidence? Or was the motive signed and notarized from the start? Detective Paul Reyes sat across from Sharon Eves, flipping through the property transfer documents with a kind of weariness that only seasoned homicide detectives could wear. Sharon's eyes were rimmed red but dry, too dry if Paul were honest. Her voice cracked in all the right places, but her story? It didn't hold up under even light pressure. She told me she wanted to leave it to me, Sharon said again, her fingers locked so tightly together her knuckles looked white. I mean, she said that. A few weeks before this. Paul leaned forward. Did she tell anyone else? No, just me. We were close. I took care of her. But according to 3 of Lydia's neighbors, Sharon hadn't been around much at all. In fact, one neighbor mentioned they'd heard raised voices between the women just days before the murder. Something about money. Something about signing it over. And now, the deed was missing. The murder scene had grown cold, but Lydia's study, the room where she kept her most important papers, was still warm with secrets. Tucked behind the bookshelf was a small wall safe. And inside that safe was everything you'd expect from a woman who planned meticulously. Insurance papers, a birth certificate, and a manila envelope, empty. That envelope, investigators confirmed, had once contained the original deed to the house Lydia had owned for nearly 30 years. But now, not only was the deed missing, it had also been recently refiled. The title transfer showed the house had been moved into joint tenancy 2 weeks before the murder. Signed by Lydia Eves. Notarized by a woman named Tessa Morano. Problem? Lydia's hands had become so badly arthritic she couldn't even hold a pen straight, let alone sign her full legal name cleanly. And the notary? She didn't exist. Handwriting analysis confirmed what Reyes had suspected. The signature wasn't Lydia's. The loops were wrong. The pressure was inconsistent. And most damning of all, the ink used wasn't a pen found anywhere in the home. The forgery wasn't just sloppy. It was arrogant. Whoever had created the fake document believed they could pass it off without question. But Reyes wasn't buying it. He ordered a full background check on Sharon. What he found made the blood drain from his face. Sharon had been in deep debt, a gambling problem, 3 defaulted credit cards, and a recent application for a home equity loan, using the newly transferred deed as collateral. The transfer had been filed 36 hours before Lydia was found dead. Sharon hadn't just wanted the house. She'd already started selling it before Lydia's body was even cold. Now Reyes had to move carefully. If he pushed too hard, Sharon could lawyer up and disappear behind privilege. But if he waited too long, she might finalize the sale and walk away clean. He called in the district attorney and requested a freeze on the deed. Then, armed with a subpoena, he paid a visit to Sharon's apartment. Her reaction was textbook. Righteous anger, shocked disbelief, and finally, frantic denial. What are you talking about? I didn't forge anything. Lydia wanted me to have that house. I don't even know how to fake a signature. But the truth had already begun leaking through the cracks. In her trash bin was a crumpled practice sheet with Lydia's name scribbled over and over in slightly different styles. On her laptop, forensic techs found a saved PDF template of a property deed, complete with an editable signature line. She wasn't just lying. She had rehearsed. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was emotional. Lydia had once trusted Sharon like a daughter. Took her in. Paid her rent when she couldn't afford it. Shared wine and old memories. And in return, Sharon forged her name, stole her house, and murdered her in the kitchen to make it look like a break-in gone wrong. Or at least, that was what it looked like, until the walls started talking. When police returned to Lydia's house with a blacklight and a sense of suspicion, they noticed something strange behind the baseboard in her study. A thin line of newer paint, barely visible, hiding something more sinister. They removed the baseboard and found a small blood splatter behind it. Lydia hadn't died in the kitchen. She had been killed in her study. And someone had tried to paint the truth away. If you've watched this far, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because the next piece of evidence will tear this case wide open. The murder wasn't just for the deed, it was a performance. And the audience? She had lived next door for 16 years. Heard every door slam, every fight, every late-night visit. But it wasn't until the night of the murder that she saw something that made her freeze and stay silent. Until now. The call came in quietly, just after 10 p.m., when Detective Reyes was halfway through a stack of crime scene photos. A woman named Bonnie Krause, neighbor, retired nurse, 68 years old. She said she had information, but it wasn't safe to say over the phone. Reyes knew that tone, the one people used when they'd been holding a secret so long it had grown legs and teeth. He met Bonnie on her porch the next morning. She was already waiting. Her hands trembled as she handed over a small, spiral-bound notebook. The edges were frayed, and the pages were filled with years of neighborhood gossip, neatly cataloged in fine blue ink. Reyes flipped through it, columns of dates, times, and events. He stopped at one particular entry. It was dated 3 nights before Lydia's murder. Sharon arrives at 11:42 p.m. Argument starts. Loud. Lydia screams, "You'll never touch that house." Then silence. Bonnie sat down across from him, staring at the wood grain of the table like it held answers. "I heard it all through the wall," she said. "Thin as paper between our houses. But I didn't say anything. Not then." Reyes leaned in. "Why not?" Bonnie's eyes glistened. "Because I didn't think she'd actually do it." Bonnie had documented years' worth of arguments between Lydia and Sharon. Most of them were about money. Sometimes about promises not kept. But one theme came up again and again. Ownership. Lydia had no children, no spouse, no surviving family. Sharon had inserted herself slowly over time, first as a tenant, then as a helper, then as a supposed heir. But Lydia never officially gave her that role. In fact, according to one of Bonnie's entries from 3 months earlier, Lydia had told her directly, "I'd rather burn the house down than leave it to Sharon." Now Lydia was dead, the house nearly sold, and Sharon was claiming it all happened exactly as Lydia intended. But Bonnie's testimony said otherwise. While Reyes had already gathered security footage from Lydia's home, the camera had been facing the driveway, offering nothing but Sharon's car pulling in and out. But Bonnie had a doorbell cam too, and it caught the exact moment Sharon fled the scene the night of the murder. 1:36 a.m., a figure bolted out of Lydia's front door. 1:37 a.m., the porch light flickered, then went out. 1:39 a.m., Sharon's vehicle backed out quickly, headlights off. The timestamp matched precisely with Lydia's time of death. Even more damning, when Reyes enhanced the footage frame by frame, he saw something glinting in Sharon's hand, a silver object. Not a phone. Not keys. A hammer. Reyes ordered a renewed search of the wooded ditch behind Sharon's apartment complex. 2 hours in, officers found it, a claw hammer partially buried in mud, wrapped in a gray towel. The handle was smeared with blood. DNA would confirm what everyone suspected. It was Lydia's. The weapon matched the injuries precisely. No burglar would carry a hammer wrapped in a towel. This wasn't a break-in. It was a silencing. But there was one thing that still didn't sit right with Reyes. Why risk killing someone over a property deed that hadn't yet been approved by probate? Unless the killer thought they had already won. As Reyes dug deeper into Lydia's financials, something caught his eye. Weeks before her death, Lydia had paid a legal retainer to a new attorney, someone she'd met at the community senior center. When he contacted the attorney, the man confirmed it. Lydia had been preparing to rewrite her will. She was cutting Sharon out, the lawyer said. Said she didn't trust her anymore. She was planning to donate the house to a local shelter for abused women. It was supposed to be a safe space. The revised will was scheduled to be signed the day after she was murdered. The motive couldn't have been clearer. Sharon had learned about the updated will. She knew once Lydia signed it, she'd lose everything she'd conned her way into. So she struck first. She forged the deed. Then she forged her alibi. And then she swung. Detective Reyes returned to Sharon's apartment, this time with an arrest warrant in hand. She was standing at the kitchen sink, pouring wine. Her hand froze when he knocked. "What now?" she said, barely masking her annoyance. Reyes didn't speak. He just read her rights slowly as 2 officers cuffed her hands behind her back. "You lied," he said, looking her in the eyes. "You didn't kill her because of what she had. You killed her because of what she was about to take away. Want to see how the trial tore the town in two? We reveal how Sharon's courtroom performance turned the community against itself, and the verdict no one saw coming. Hit like, tap subscribe, and don't miss the unraveling of a killer who tried to charm her way to freedom. When an inheritance is inked in secrecy and soaked in greed, it doesn't just divide families, it detonates them. And when the final will surfaced, so did the name no one expected, and a signature someone died for. The courthouse was a portrait of tension the morning the last will and testament of Harold Raymond Monroe was unveiled. Weathered columns loomed over the steps like silent jurors. Inside, the air hung heavy with something thicker than grief, expectation. Everyone in that courtroom, from Harold's siblings to the quiet woman in the back row dressed in black, came for one thing: the deed. Detective Serena Lott stood off to the side, her badge tucked under a plain blazer, her expression unreadable. She had spent weeks picking through the motives, lies, and carefully curated facades around Harold's death. But now, with the will finally entered into probate, she hoped it would crack the case wide open. The lawyer, a stooped man with more years in practice than most of the room had been alive, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. The last will of Harold R. Monroe, dated 2 months before his passing, leaves the entirety of the property at 192 Greenview Lane and all associated assets to Ms. Margaret Hill. A sharp inhale filled the room. Margaret's eyes widened and her mouth parted, but she said nothing. Not the siblings. Not the girlfriend of 3 years. Margaret. A part-time caretaker who'd begun helping Harold only 8 months before his death. Her name wasn't even mentioned in the first draft of the will, at least not the one Serena had seen when she dug through Harold's attorney files. So what changed? The room erupted with whispered curses and disbelieving mutters. Margaret finally broke her silence, pressing a trembling hand to her chest as if overwhelmed. He said he wanted me to be taken care of. He told me I reminded him of his late wife. But Serena saw it. The twitch at the corner of her eye, the rehearsed innocence in her voice, and more importantly, the scratch of the pen. The signature on the will didn't match. Back at the station, Serena ran the signature through the digital forensics unit. Comparisons between older documents and the newly filed will revealed something unmistakable. The loop on the H was different, the angle of them slightly off. It was forged, and likely after Harold had died. But there was more. Harold had withdrawn $40,000 in cash the week before his death. No explanation, no record of where it went. Security footage from the bank was already under review, but the paper trail dead-ended. Then a breakthrough came in the form of a phone call. Detective Lott? You don't know me, but I saw something the night Harold died. It was a voice trembling with fear. The caller wouldn't give their name, but they claimed to have seen Margaret leaving the property around midnight, clutching something wrapped in a towel. Something with blood on it. I didn't say anything. I was scared. But I can't sleep. And she shouldn't get away with it. Serena recorded the call, sent a team to sweep Harold's backyard again, and had divers recheck the pond behind the house. Buried in mud and roots, they found what they missed the first time. A blood-stained letter opener. The DNA was Harold's. And the prints? Margaret Hill. Serena returned to the courthouse as Margaret met with a real estate agent, planning to sell the house now in her name. But Serena interrupted the meeting with an arrest warrant and a single question. When you killed him, did you already have the will or did you forge it after? Margaret froze. For a second her mask slipped. But then her lips curled into a bitter smile. You can't prove that. We already have. The forged signature. The anonymous witness. The missing murder weapon. Signed in blood. In the end, greed didn't just push Margaret to murder. It pushed her to rewrite a man's legacy and try to walk away with a house soaked in betrayal. But Harold Monroe didn't die in silence. Every misplaced loop of a letter, every careless drop of blood, it told the story he couldn't. Sometimes the truth doesn't live in the will, it bleeds out in the aftermath. You've seen how far someone will go for a piece of property. But in the final chapter, you'll see who helped cover it up, and why it nearly worked. So if you've watched this far, hit subscribe and stay tuned. Because next, the truth gets ugly. He thought he had covered every angle. The forged documents, the perfectly timed alibi, even the buyer lined up for the house. But what he didn't plan for was the one text message his cousin never deleted. And that single oversight would unravel everything he killed to protect. Detective Kara Jennings had seen greed do terrible things. Families torn apart, lies piled high on graves, but something about the silence in that house stuck with her. A silence that screamed. And the house on Elderberry Drive wasn't just a property, it was a motive carved in wood and stained with blood. After the coroner confirmed the cause of death, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, attention shifted to the suspicious will. The signature, although similar to Eleanor Dunley's, didn't match the other documents she'd signed days before her death. The timestamp on the new will? 1 day after she supposedly died. That was all investigators needed to dig deeper. It was Trevor Dunley's cousin Anthony who gave them the break. Anthony came into the station voluntarily. Nervous, sweating. His phone clenched in his hand. I didn't know she was dead. I thought we were just gonna change some paperwork, move things around, help Trevor keep the house in the family, he told officers. But then she was gone. And Trevor said not to ask questions. Detectives took Anthony's phone and ran it through forensic software. That's when they found it, a deleted voice memo recovered from the cloud. Trevor's voice, clear as day. Once we file the new deed, it's ours. No one else has to know what she wanted. She's not gonna be around anyway. That audio alone wasn't enough to prove murder, but it was enough for a search warrant. And what police found during that search left no more room for doubt. Hidden in Trevor's garage inside a locked safe behind a false wall were 3 key items. A blood-spattered hammer, the original deed and signed by Eleanor but covered in her fingerprints, and a deposit receipt for $250,000, half the value of the house, sent by a cash buyer the day after her body was found. Trevor had planned to sell the house quickly, pay off some debt and disappear to Arizona. He already had a new driver's license under a different name, but his timeline unraveled. The forged documents had discrepancies. His cousin cracked under pressure. And the body, hidden in a crawl space under the basement, wasn't supposed to be found until long after he was gone. He was arrested while trying to board a late-night Greyhound bus to Tucson. The look on his face, witnesses said, wasn't fear. It was frustration. As if he still couldn't believe he was caught. In court, Trevor pled not guilty. He claimed the will was real, that his aunt had a fall in the basement and died instantly. He panicked, he said. Didn't know what to do. But the jury didn't buy it. Neither did the judge, who labeled the crime as premeditated greed in its purest form. Trevor Dunley was sentenced to life without parole. His appeal was denied last year. The house, now the subject of civil disputes and unpaid liens, sits abandoned. The for sale sign remains faded and crooked, a grim reminder of a home no one wants to touch. Neighbors say they still see the porch light flicker at night. No one's ever changed the bulb. If this story left you shaken, you're not alone. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because the next story we cover might be even closer to home. And tell us below, how far do you think someone would go for a house that wasn't theirs to begin with?